My good people, Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be focusing on the ignition coils and spark plug replacement on the M276 engine. Today, we're going to be working on a 2014 Mercedes-Benz E350. However, this service kit is going to be applicable, but not limited to your W204 facelift C300s, your W207 and W212 2012 Plus E350s, as well as your GLE 350s and your ML 350s. We're going to be using our OE kit that we list on the site that includes your spark plugs, your intake manifold gasket, as well as your throttle body gasket, and your ignition coils. These are all OE components, exactly what the car was born with from the factory. Typically, we recommend that you do this replacement every 60,000 miles. The car behind us has a little bit over 100K. It's on its original hardware, so we're going to go ahead and replace the coils, the plugs, the gaskets, everything while we're in there. Because this job is a little bit more consuming than your average ignition coil spark plug job, we recommend, if your coils are original, just get them done while you're in there, as the intake manifold does have to come off. But before we get all involved in that, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. For this job, we're going to be using two different size ratchets. We have a 3/8 and a 1/4 inch ratchet. We also have an electric impact ratchet. It just helps speed up the removal and install of hardware. A flashlight, of course. Two different extensions for the 3/8 and 1/4 inch ratchet. We have an E10 and an E8 socket, a T15, a T25. We have a 12.14 millimeter socket for a spark plug removal tool. And then a couple nice to haves, but not completely mandatory, are a flathead and an array of pliers and needle nose pliers. And then for the torquing, we're going to use a 3/8 drive ratchet to torque everything down. Now that we have our tools covered, let's get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, we are at the car. We're going to start by removing a couple of the plastic fantastic pieces in our way, and let's get started. First off, you have your front beauty cover. This simply lifts up. It's just got a couple metal clips that hold it into place. Set that to the side. Now, before we get any further, I'm just going to give you a lay of the land. This is our intake manifold that we're going to be removing to get to our plugs and coils. Your throttle body, that's right here, is going to come off with it. Should you choose to decide to undo these clamps, you can remove these. However, they are a one-time use clamp. Because we're not going to get into that today, we're going to take off our manifold with half of our air box, which I'll show you how to do that as well. This would also be a good time to replace your engine air filter if you haven't done so already. So next on the list is going to be the engine air filter box. We're going to work on getting that loosened up so it can come out with our manifold. And for that, you're going to need an E10 socket. We have two E10 bolts here. I'm going to start with our forward one. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to remove this accordion piece right here, or it's attached to the accordion piece on the airbox. You have two tabs here if you want to take off the accordion piece with it. Just push them in. One tab here, lift up. Set this to the side with your beauty cover. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to take a T25. You have 3 of them that hold the top of the lid to the other half of the airbox. To get them off, you're simply going to get rid of this little trim here, set it off to the side, and then this box is press fit. You're just going to lift it up and away from the engine, and you'll get it up enough so that you can remove your T25s. Should you want to, you can take the whole thing out with the manifold. However, that's just going to give you a lot of stuff to carry. And from there, this half comes out. You can set this off to the side. We'll leave this attached to our throttle body. With that done, we're going to work on some of the connectors and vacuum lines going through our throttle body and intake tube that are going to have to come off. I'm using a little flathead screwdriver to help me with some of these connectors if they're stubborn. We have one of our sensors right here that has a little gray tab. You're simply going to pull up on to unlock it. If you can't get your finger in there like me, you can use a small flathead. Once it's up, just push on the plastic tab that's right in here and you'll be able to pull it off. On the exterior side of it, we have a small vacuum line that goes to our intake tube. That pulls out as well. Set that off to the side. Now we have another sensor up here. Same thing. Unlock it with the gray tab. Push in on the black tab. There is also going to be a connection on the bottom of the electric throttle body, which we'll be able to get to once we pull up the manifold a little bit. But there is one there. Next to the steel braided line, we have another connector that goes to our intake manifold on the driver's side. Same thing. Pop that gray clip. And off it comes. And then there's going to be a couple more that we're going to get to, but they'll be easier to see as the manifold comes up. So now let's work on getting our hardware off to get that out. Starting by removing this cover that says V6. You have two bolts that hold it up here. These are just fake inserts. To get these two off, a T15 is going to help. I have a T15 socket and a 1/4-inch wrench. And then this cover simply comes off, exposing the two access holes to our E10s, which we'll get to in a moment. All right, with this exposed, you're gonna have two E10 Torx bolts in there. Your E10 socket, preferably you're gonna wanna use a 1/4-inch drive one. They are thinner, they're gonna fit in here easier than the 3/8 drive ones. These only get torqued to 9 Newton meters, so they should be fairly easy to remove. You have two more E10 bolts at the back. There's two. Before we start lifting, there is also a vacuum line that runs to the beginning of the intake manifold. The same T15 from earlier will help you get the securing bolt off. And then this should be able to just slide out. Usually there's an O-ring. There you go. All right. Now we can start lifting up on everything. You'll see we have one more vacuum line attached here. That should just pull off with a little bit of encouragement. And you can just work it back and forth. Set that off to the side. Moving forward, as we lift it up gently, you're going to see what else is going to be attached. On the passenger side of the intake manifold, beneath your flap actuators, we have two electrical connectors. One down here that we're going to start with, and we have one more up top here. And now let's head over to the other side, on the driver's side. On the driver's side, we have a T25 that holds this vacuum line on. That's going to come off with the intake manifold, so make sure to remove that as well. With that undone, you can go ahead and pull it up, just so it comes off with our manifold. Next, before we continue, we're going to go ahead and revisit the front again. We're going to lift up now that we have a lot more room. We're going to undo the connector going to our electronic throttle body. The cable is also held in place by a clip underneath the intake manifold. You'll see it right there, it just pops out. And now we should be able to pull this forward and see what's left on the back. All right, and then we have one more vacuum line down here that you want to pull off. We have one more line here. You just want to pinch the two ends. There she goes. Boom, baby. Before I go any further, I'm just going to shove some paper towel down these intake runners, just to avoid anything falling in there by accident. Next, we're going to work on removing our ignition coils. To do that, you're going to want to, just like the other connectors, pull back on this gray tab, and off they come. I'm going to do that for all 6 before I work on removing the hardware. To get the ignition coil bodies off, you're going to need an E8, an E-Torx 8. From there, your coils should pop right up. You have a little bit of a tab that you can use to grab onto when you pull them up. You don't want to rip them, especially if you're not replacing them. All right, now we can get our plugs out. And again, as mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'm using CTA tool 2376. It's a 12.14 millimeter socket. I'm just putting it on a normal 3/8 extension. Not too bad. Before I continue, I'm going to feed the new one in just so I avoid anything falling in there. Whenever I do spark plugs on any car, I always like to back up the threads just to make sure they're not incorrectly engaged, and then start them by hand. I do this on every single car I work on. We're going to leave that hand tight. We're going to come back and torque them all down to 23 Newton meters. Now we're going to torque all of these down to 23 Newton meters. With those torqued down, now we can install our new ignition coils. Similar to the removal process, we're just going to slide on over the plug. You're going to feel them snug over the spark plug, and then we'll put in our hardware to hold them down. From there, I'm going to start all the hardware by hand, and then I'm just going to use my electric impact to snug them down. However, if you're going to torque these, you're going to torque them down to 9 Newton meters. And I'm just going to give them a final snug down by hand. And now we can plug in our electrical connectors. Beautiful. Now we're going to do the same thing on the driver's side bank. However, we have to give ourselves a little bit of room. So let me show you how to do that first, and then the rest will be the same as this passenger side. Now on this side, what we have to do is we have to lift up the ECU and just flip it up over to the side so that this loom comes up with it for the most part and gives us some room to work in. Before we do that, we're going to undo this electrical connector here. If you're lucky, yours hasn't been ripped apart in the past. It's just a little tab that holds it in there. Ours is crispy and gone. You just want to, same thing like the other connectors, lift up on the gray tab here. Might help to get a flat head on the other side. And then you also have usually 2 little rubber clips here that just kind of press into the bracket that hold the loom in place. And then to lift up the ECU, it's got 4 grommets that hold it into place. You literally just grab from underneath, grab firmly from up here. Oh, these were kind of loose. They should just pop out. I'm gonna have another grommet under the ECU here under the loom that holds this wiring harness in place. Try to pop that off without breaking it if possible. There we go. You want to make sure to pull out the dipstick as well so you can lift up the harness and put it on the other side. You don't want to break the plastic tab here. And with that undone, you can go ahead and slip the loom behind the dipstick tube there as best as you can, just to kind of give yourself some room to work with. And now that we've gotten to this point, we're going to repeat the same process as we did on the right bank, starting by disconnecting all 3 of our electrical connectors. Then we're going to take an E8 Torx socket and remove all of our hardware holding in our coils. Before we go any further, we have one T25 here that holds on this little ear of a bracket. I'm going to remove it. As you can see, I'm kind of fighting to get my extension and socket in here. So by removing this one bracket, I should give myself enough room to get our plug in and out there. This is for the second cylinder in on the driver's side. I'm just going to leave that in there. No need to take it out. And then we're going to take our spark plug socket removal tool and get these 6 plugs out and replace them with the new ones. Now with all our ignition coils in, everything's torqued down, our plugs are back on, we can go ahead and put our ECU back in place. So again, you'll see we have 1, 2, and then 2 more rubber grommets at the bottom that our whole ECU body keys into. Here's the 2 bottom plastic guides that go into the bottom 2 rubber grommets. With those in, we can go ahead and route this cable back this way, plug it in real quick, push that down, set it where it kind of lived. We have our 1 grommet here, push that there, and that can sit something like that. At the same time, our loom is back in place, put our dipstick back on. All right, now at this point, we're gonna go ahead and prep the seals for install. By that, I'm gonna go ahead and remove my little safety rags that I put in the runners. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna prep the surface by installing our new seals. Now, the reason I'm installing them on the engine instead of the manifold is because if I set them in the manifold, this side that comes down, there's no guarantee that they're gonna seal properly over the ports here. So if you get them started on the port side, just like so, then you know that they're gonna make good contact when the manifold comes down. You'll see on the seals, there's a little green notch. Basically what I'm doing is I'm keying them. There's a little notch on these ports as well. I'm just using that as my reference to key them in properly. Beautiful. With that done, I'm gonna bring the intake manifold over. And before I set it down into place, I'm gonna work on connecting our lines back here and our electrical connectors while it's easy to get to. Then we'll sit it down flush, bolt it down, and work on the rest of the connectors. So I'm going to work on connecting our vacuum line and our other vacuum line back into that pump in the back of the block. It's just going to sit like that for now. So what I'm going to start with is by connecting our bottom vacuum line first. These pliers worked beautiful for that. These are Gear Wrench 82017. And in addition, we have our other vacuum line, which takes a T25. We'll snug that one in now while we have some room. And just a calculated wrist. Should do it no more than 7 to 9 Newton meters if you want to torque this down at home. Next, while everything is loose, we're going to go ahead and do our electronic throttle body cable while also routing the cord back into that metal retaining clip. With our throttle body cable situated, we can continue working around the perimeter of the manifold. We have our vacuum line over here that we have to plug back in. We have our electrical connector by the steel line right here. Then on the passenger side, we have 2 more connectors. You have your top electrical connector on the very back here. Just trying to grab the cable, just like that, lock it in. You have your bottom one, lock it in. Now let's head back up front. Now with our hard to reach connectors back in place, we're gonna go ahead and work on situating our manifold. Oh yeah, baby. That's beautiful right there. All right, now with our manifold in, your airbox lid somewhat in place just so it's not obstructing your manifold install. You can look in and see if your holes are aligned for your hardware. Then you can go ahead and try to start the hardware by hand. Just gonna snug those up for now. Try to get our rear one situated as well. And then just like the other hardware, for the most part, the torque values are all the same. We're gonna torque these down to 9 Newton meters. It's not a lot. All 4 bolts are snug up. We're gonna torque them down to 9 Newton meters. These are E10, 9 Newton meters. Love it. Next, we're gonna go ahead and hook up this vacuum line. Make sure it sits nice and flush. Take your Torx bolt, start it by hand. And we're just gonna snug it up with the T15 once again. Just nice and snug, it's plastic, it doesn't need to be torqued down all that much. While we're in this nook, we're gonna plug in our sensor up top here once again. Lock it in. Over here, we have our vacuum line. This pops into the rubber boot. Beautiful. While I have you here, we're also gonna take our other vacuum line and plug this back in. You have this, that's gonna grab onto the metal line in front of the oil filter housing. Get your line plugged in first. You have another electrical connector right up here. Lock that bad boy in. And then before we wrap up, we'll do a final check to make sure we have all the connectors in place. But next, let's go ahead and work on installing our airbox once again. Just like we did during the removal, we're gonna pull this back up. The bottom of our box keys into 2 little hooks at the bottom of this box. It really only goes in one way. Take our T25, sandwich it back together. Again, you just want to let it stop. These are not torqued down very much at all since they're plastic. Snug. Snug. Then we're going to push it back down. This airbox, to paint a visual picture without being able to show you inside, is kind of clocks in at a 20-degree angle, almost very slight at the very bottom. You'll know it's in the right place if your 2 bolt holes for your E10s are aligned perfectly. While I have those out, I'm going to take the opportunity of the little bit of play that I have to reconnect this accordion piece. Something like that will do. Now we can take our two E10s, put those back on. Then next, but not least, we're going to put on our little V6 plaque back over. And again, our T15 is going to be our friend for these little ones as well. At this point would be a good time to go ahead and make sure nothing's unplugged. You didn't forget any plug or vacuum line or electrical connector. Once you're sure that it's all put together, you can go ahead and slip your cover back on and your rubber seal that we took off earlier and wrap this up. Put our cover back over in place. Put our seal back on. And boom, there you have it, baby. And there you have it, my good people. Another DIY in the books. Overall, not a terrible job doing the ignition coils and spark plugs on an M276. If you like what you saw in this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave them in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.